less than 1,000 people that had cell phones. And today, somewhere between 6 and 7 million people have cell phones. I could actually talk to 6 million people. That kind of boggled my mind. That's all for me. Randy, you're next.
Yeah, this is Randy. I'm in McKinney, Texas, just north of Dallas. Joe, when you talked about the temperature there, I saw a map today that somebody had published that was it was a map of the United States, but we could see your neck of the woods in it, and it was all color-coded as to when spring will arrive. And I would have to report to you that according to that map, the code for your part of the country was never. And so I'm not sure what that bodes for you, but I will tell you that, you know, just in terms of convincing you that that something is in charge and you're easily deceived and all those kinds of things that were implied by Jim's question. On Saturday and Sunday here, the temperature was in the high 70s and low 80s, and one of the trees in my backyard actually has big, beautiful buds on it. We got up this morning, it was 28 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm not sure the status of those buds today, but they were there on Sunday, and I'm complete.
Wow.
And so over to Roger.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what the question was, but I saw this group was going on, and I ordered this book. I mean, I was familiar with Margaret Wheatley, and I got the book yesterday, and I read the first chapter, and I thought we were doing chapter 2 tonight. For some reason, I read that someplace, or that we were supposed to read it or something. But anyway, just thumbing through this book and some of the people that she, Pema Chodron is a person that I've got several books by, a little Buddhist nun that is fascinating and writes. She puts me up against reality every time I read one of her talks. And anyway, to find out Margaret Wheatley was plugged into, you know, this looks very Buddhist to me, the book itself, but it just, reading chapter 1 and 2, I found myself wanting to do something that lasts, and Wheatley sort of confronted me with that, and so I'm not sure what's going on, but I think I need to be here. And this goes to Cheryl.
Well, hi there. I'm Cheryl. I came down with a bit of a sickness today, so forgive me if I cough in your ears here. But I actually realized this week that I've been spending a lot of time with people who do ORIDs and focused conversations, because I was having a conversation with a new friend, and he didn't ask me questions about what I was saying. He disagreed. Can you? And somehow I just realized that I've been spending so much of my time with people who communicate in the way of questioning that I was quite surprised when I didn't get a question in reply, but I got an opinion. Hey, can you hear me? Is my sound okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
Yep. That's good. And we're over to Steve.
Well, it's Steve here on the banks of the frozen St. Croix River. Last I counted, there were at least 6, maybe 7 fishing villages in the middle of the river. And what used to be 95 going north back on the street seems like it's 95, Highway 95 going north and south in the middle of the St. Croix River. So it's very strange out there. So that just continues to intrigue me, that there are these little villages, little ice house villages that form out on the river, and there's this whole sociality of dogs and snowmobiles and trucks and who knows all what goes on there. But the guy could go out there and check it out, probably.
Cool. That's it, Jim. Did you
So
want
shall
to?
we proceed to chapter 1?
Sure.
Ellen Howie here. I didn't get called on, but I'll answer anyhow. Up in New York State on Sunday, it was 46 below, and so I took advantage of staying in and getting the book read.
Very good.
Ellen,
right.
are you on the, did you phone in, Ellen?
Yes.
Oh, that's why you're not on that list. Okay. Good to hear your voice.
Thank you.
Which tells us something about that list, doesn't it? Okay.
It usually tells us if someone's on the line, but I can't see it this time, so strange.
Well, it's 46 below, that's why.
And 46 below is about 46 below in centigrade too, so there you go.
Yeah, our cold water in the kitchen refuses to do anything, so that's for the last 4 days.
Is it 9 feet? Do you have snow 9 feet?
Oh yes,
high?
oh yes, we have everything up here. But we love the Northeast.
Okay, so Joe, take it away.
All right. Well, I did chapter 1, and you see that it's there on the screen there. If you can't see it there, it's in the Google Docs, and if you've got enough places on your screen, you could probably look at it there. I did not number the paragraphs because I'm doing this on an e-book, and finding paragraph numbers and remembering which paragraph is numbered what is kind of tricky on an e-book. So I just used her 3 sections there. So the objective data here is that she's got 3 sections in chapter 1. The first section has to do with river, the river of life. She calls it seeing what is. The second section is what I called, she calls it confession of innocence. I called it the destruction of naive hope. And then the third section had to do with, she called it indestructible motivation, and I called it the intention resolved to do the right work. There should be another quote after work there. And some of the key words in the first section, she used a lot of the images of river and streams, the pattern of life changing, adapting, creating, and destroying. That's supposed to be hope, not hopey. Don't hold on to the shore, be torn apart, push off, and keep your head above the water. And then she quotes Yeats, The Ceremony of Innocence is Drowned, which gives her the second section, where she talks about that she's discovering that she said, we didn't think we were innocents, but we were. We thought we could change the world. And then she goes on to say, and then a couple paragraphs later, this book was born from my clarity that greed, self-interest, and coercive power are destroying the very life force of this planet. So she says, with sufficient will and passion, we would create a world, but we no longer believe we could save the world. It's a disastrous course. She tells a South Africa story of everybody after the revolution, essentially, in South Africa being full of hope and now being exhausted and in despair. And then she says, but despite that, she says, I'm not set out to write a book that increases our despair after all of that, after she has already done that. But then she says, my intention is that if we do our work with greater resolve and energy, with more delight and confidence, my intention is that we do that with more delight and confidence, even as we understand that it won't turn this world around. Our work is essential. We just have to hold it differently. And then she quotes Václav Havel, hope is certainty that something makes sense regardless of how it turns out. And she starts asking questions. How do we find the confidence we're doing the right work? Hope is dangerous because it is premeditated disappointment and more committed to right work. And then she says true warriors, which is a major image of this book. True warriors are those with hearts open, aware of challenges, and don't succumb to anger and aggression. So I kind of figured the functional part of this was that there was an intro, the thesis, and a call to respond. And I think this book sets out the structure of her thought. So I think a couple of her key points is doing our work with the illusion that we will change the world will lead to despair, and what is required is to do our, quote, right work, which she doesn't go into it at that point, really. And the image comes from the River of Life section, and my image that I see in this is that the image is like being carried down a river, a raging river in massive flood on a melting ice flow, taking care of the others stranded on the same ice flow. That's the image that I got out of this whole chapter. So I've got, if you like, you can ask questions of clarification of what she said, but I'm not sure that I can add much more. And then we'll go to the provocative questions. And I have two questions that I'd like the group to think about. I'm going to read them now, and then if you have questions of clarification before we go on to them, we can do it. My two provocative grounding questions are, where have you experienced that your life work is not going to achieve the wonderful change in society that you thought it was? And perhaps simultaneously, another question, where have you had an insight that you are doing the work you are meant to do in history? So those are the two questions that I'd like us to talk about over the next 15 minutes or so. First of all, does anybody have any questions of clarification or additions of clarification to what Margaret Wheatley actually said?
Joe, this is Cheryl. I'm actually just wondering. Oh, there it is. I was just wondering if the questions could be moved. Do you have the questions on the screen somewhere?
They're on the screen at the bottom of the screen, okay, underneath the chart.
Perfect. Thanks, Joe.
They probably should have been in bold to be bright enough for you to see, but I didn't know that. Okay. Any questions or anything you'd add, and what Margaret said, or questions that you have about what she said?
This is Randy. It just struck me that when she was talking about this thing about not changing the world and all the kinds of ways that your work has failed, that her insight there is that the motivation is no longer, you're no longer motivated by the outcomes that you anticipated, and as a matter of fact, in order to stay motivated, you have to forget about outcomes. Yep.
Basically, that's what she says. That naive hope is hope, which I think she sees it as illusion, is destroyed, and that the choice you have is to keep on doing the right work, the work because it makes sense, not because it's going to come up with something.
This is Leah, and I'm interested in this. Hold it. Our work is essential. Hold it differently.
Mm-hmm.
What's that? Holding it differently. Not worrying about the outcome, that could be it, but is there more to it than that?
Well, she follows that sentence, we have to hold it differently, with the quote from Václav Havel. So he said, and I'll do the whole thing, hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense regardless of how it turns out. That's the whole quote that she quotes from him. And then her next question is, how do we find this deep confidence that independent of results, our work is the right work for us to be doing? How do we give up needing hope to be our primary motivator? How do we replace hope of creating change with confidence that we're doing the right work?
Ellen Howie here. I believe that when I know that I'm doing the right work that I'm meant to do is to do it in the best way possible and offer it up.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So that might take
This is Steve.
Go ahead,
I was
Steve.
just going to concur with Mr. Alexander that I also noticed that she quotes liberally from Pema Chodron, who's well-known Buddhist, and the notion of right work and right path and right speech and so on, those are stepping stones on the Eightfold Path. Maybe that isn't so important, but she does seem to suggest that making the value system by which you make choices, it's worthwhile taking a look at that. It's the interior value system, not what's going on in the outside world, maybe, that is the driver at this point.
A good quote from her, another good quote is, as the, quote, blood-dimmed tide of greed, fear, and oppression drowns out their voices and washes away their good work, they become more committed to their work, not because it will succeed, but just because it is right for them to be doing it. I watch their inner struggles and bouts with despair, but mostly what I notice is their perseverance and confidence. So I want to ask the grounding
This
question.
is Randy.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to say I'm just struck by how all of this is reminiscent of stuff that's been in our history for a long time. When you were reading the Václav Havel quote, I was thinking we put some of Kazantzakis' words into a song that went something like, conquer hope, the greatest temptation. And then in terms of just doing the right thing, I was remembering Bonhoeffer saying, do the deed and leave the judgment to God. I'm complete.
So that's good, because now we've got the reflective level here in terms of associations. So now let's go to the provocative questions here. Where have you experienced that your life work is not going to achieve the wonderful change in society that you thought it was? Where have you run into that limit?
This is Jim.
It might be a tough thing to say out loud, right? Okay, Jim, and then whoever was after Jim.
Cheryl.
Okay.
So this is Jim. This Saturday is a neighborhood summit here in Phoenix. A woman connected with retired Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor has resolved to make the neighborhoods of Phoenix relevant, and she's got somebody working with her, and they're having a summit, and they're going to use sticky walls and get a bunch of facilitators free of charge. And they're going to have everybody write on the wall one thing they're going to do when they walk away from there, and they're going to share approaches that work, and they're going to gather all kinds of information, and there's going to be about 200 people, and I just cannot talk myself into going there one more time.
Okay.
I'm complete. Cheryl.
For me, excuse me, for me it's been working in nonprofits. I started my nonprofit work in more direct services, and people would come to me with problems, and I would never be able to follow up with them as their lives changed. And so I never saw the outcome. I never was able to know their ups or their downs. I didn't necessarily know whether I helped or not. And really, for me, there was a really transformative point when I started to work in communities, where I felt like there was a little bit more holism, and like I was able to see people through both the good and the bad, and on a personal level, they were able to also see me through good and bad, which really created a much healthier dynamic in our relationships, I think. So, but that problem-solving piece was really challenging for me when I was charged with solving someone's problem. I'm complete.
Somebody else. I'm thinking of a marvelous client that I worked with. It was the James Bay Cree Nation, and I had 1,000 people participating in governance project. 1,000 people, think of it. And from 43 focus groups and 10 remote communities and 4 cities, and everything from young people to elders, and in Korean English, and they all had ideas on governance and values that they wanted held in governance, and I got the Grand Chief and all the leadership to pull it all together, and they were supposed to use it for building their rebuilding their internal governance. Well, they used it sort of vaguely in the couple of with the province of Quebec and with the feds in some negotiations they had to do, but they didn't bother to do anything and change their own internal governance. And it was, you know, it was 2 years of really solid, exciting work bringing, and people are emailing me, so whatever happened to all of our results? Well, I'm still friends with some of those people on Facebook, but they've never used the stuff. Anybody else?
Yeah, this is Gordon, and I'll go to one historical, ancient experience and then one more contemporary. But I think when we started working in Fifth City as our demonstration project, and we discovered very quickly that what we had hoped would be a radical, rapid transformation wasn't happening. And I remember the struggle we had when Joe, and I can't quote him exactly, but said something like, you know, it doesn't matter what happens specifically in terms of results in Fifth City. This is sheer symbol. And it was a way of saying we're working here, and it's the work itself that has value, and not being hung on to results that everybody else is looking for from a community development project. Anyway, that was a revelation. Then working with Boeing in November and December, did 8 days of training there, and went in not expecting very much to happen there, and finding people in great despair and cynicism about the organization having any possibility of changing. But just the sheer experience of diving into that without expectations, and the delight that you can have working with a group where neither you nor they expect incredible change to happen, but knowing that things might happen that you have no control over, and that it's worth the investment. And I'm finished.
Somebody else. The place where you experienced your life work is not going to achieve the wonderful change in society you thought it was.
Well, this is Steve again. I spent 5 fabulous years in Moscow working on trying to reform the Russian accounting system and create a civil society. And it seemed like things were well on the way when I left in the year 2000. It's been an extraordinary series of all of the Russian billionaires who own the top floors around Central Park in New York City, and how they came to own them and where their money came from in that era that I was so naively trying to encourage accurate accounting procedures and a civil society, none of which seems to have prevailed 15 years later. So it's interesting. It's just interesting where you put your marks down, and you know, the snow seems to be able to cover those over quite well.
Mm. So, perhaps simultaneously, or maybe not, where have you had an insight that you are doing the work you are meant to do, the right work, the work you are meant to do in history? Might have been a glimpse, might have been more than that. Anybody?
In 1995, I became a school teacher, a high school English teacher. This is Leah talking. And I had more fun teaching English. And I remember one time, Randy, you remember that time you were in Incline and you told me about the West Wing, some program about a terrorist attack for the White House, and it was on the West Wing.
I do remember that.
You do?
Yes.
Yes. So I got a copy of the West Wing. We showed it in class. It was to stimulate the writing of essays. Oh, I was so excited. And those were some of the awfulest essays I've ever read. Would I do it again? Absolutely. Absolutely, because it was the right thing to do. And, you know, it shaked brains, it rattled bones, it woke us up a bit, and we needed to do that the next day and the next day and the next day. It was the right work for me. I'm finished.
Somebody else. Wow. Somebody else.
This is Randy. Sort of the simultaneity of this. I came to this town, McKinney, in 1987 to be the chief executive officer of the local Chamber of Commerce. And during that period of time, the community grew from 28,000 to 55,000, and it's now 155,000 in only 28 years. But I was hired because I didn't know how to run a Chamber of Commerce, and they didn't want to do it like it had ever been done before. And so I said, well, I qualify. I have no clue how it's been done before. So we ran a very non-traditional Chamber of Commerce where we emphasized the responsibility of business to the community and to its whole stakeholder network. And we really made a lot of progress over the 13 years of my tenure. When I left, it was only a matter of time until they had all gone back and were doing it back in the old traditional way. Like, for example, our mission statement had been building a community of service through business and professional excellence, and they changed it back to helping our members make more money. And so it was just a total slap in the face to me. But I guess the simultaneous part of this and the way I kind of affirmed that nonetheless I've been doing the right thing, it was maybe a couple of years after that I finally wrote a personal mission statement. And you can see how far-reaching this is, but the mission statement that evolved out of all of that was that my mission is enhancing the capacity of local people to participate in building the earth. And so that maybe that's all that came out of that 13 years, and if that's it, I'm satisfied. I'm complete.
This is Helen. I don't know that I have any further insight into the work that I'm meant to do, although I'm getting a clearer sense that it's perhaps less group work and it's more with individuals. But as we talk about this, there's a saying that continues to come back into my mind, and it's the more things change, the more they stay the same. And when I think of how hope sets us up for disappointment, setting up expectations set us up, and when we work with groups, we try and help them change. And it goes, and I think it goes back to what Gordon was saying, is that perhaps it's more in the process
and what we learn out of that process and what the actual outcomes are. Because when we actually look at things, how much have we changed as human beings? There's been wars throughout every era, and we still have wars. We still have people bickering over religion, and we still have greed, and we still have things that we're doing to harm the environment, and that was happening hundreds, thousands years ago. So, you know, I'm rambling on here, but this is just all the kind of things that are going through my mind right now in terms of what we've been talking about, and I'm complete.
I'm not watching the time, and I'm afraid I'm going over on my section here. Is there anybody else, somebody who hasn't spoken, who would like to tell a story here? Well, I think that these are the questions that, for me, provoke the rest of the book and our response to the rest of the book. What is it that we are, when we run against those limits to our hope and our dreams and our wishes, that illusion of hope, when we run into those limits, what is it that is the right work that we need to be doing? And for us to continue to ask that question as we go through the book, I think, is for me the profound question. And now I'll turn it over to, I think it's chapter 4 that we're doing next, right?
Right.
Yep. Yes, and we have time to get David set up, and also, does anybody need to step away? I know Gordon hasn't had any snacks yet tonight.
Not true. I have. I've eaten. Where's my can? I held it up earlier, but you didn't see it, Jim. My Planters assorted peanuts here.
Oh.
He really does have a nut.
And I have a glass somewhere that did have a Scotch and Drambuie. In other words, a rusty nail. Yeah. So.
We need to think of some ways to help this conversation continue pushing one another. These weekly plunges are certainly helpful, but the most of us are participating around the edges so far, and yeah, it'll be interesting to see if there are some ways to involve a broader group of people and have this conversation go offline.
Well, that might just be an illusionary wish to change the world, Jim. You might just have to be glad that we're doing the right work to study what we're studying. Sorry, I couldn't resist.
What occurred to me as you were closing, Joe, and you talked about limits, it seems to me this does take us back to talk that Bultmann once gave about how our life is continually being said no to. Our hopes are being crushed and destroyed. And then when we think we've learned from that, we won't hope anymore, what happens? We find ourselves once again caught up in enthusiasm for something, and certainly that's been a pattern in my life. I was thinking of how the Occupy movement came sweeping through here, or to put it on a global scale, the Egyptian revolution. You know, that people had incredible hopes for. Wow, this may be the moment. And if it might be, you know where the butterfly effect, which we'll get to later in Margaret's work, is going to show up. But the whiplash of being thrown into hope for something and then having that said no to, and you're saying, well, now I've learned my lesson, and then once again being picked up by the forces at work in the world and the excitement of people who are out to change things. Once again, you get caught up in that, and it's great. I think it's not wrong to be swept up in some of it. Anyway, I'll stop rambling, and I'm complete.
All right, if anybody needed to step away, you've got about 2 minutes to get back.
All right.
David, this is Helen. While people have stepped away, do you want me to give you control of the screen? Or are you good with my putting it up on the screen here so people can see it?
Go ahead and put it up. I've got it on my screen, so I don't know.
Okay. Everyone else then will have it on their screen as well then.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Helen, can you make it a little bit bigger because we can't see the bottom line?
No, I'll just have to make it a little bit smaller. There we go. Can you see it now?
Helen, this
Yes.
is Leah. Can we
Yes.
make the contrast greater?
Is that better?
Why don't you leave it the first way for the first part of it, and then when we get to the question, we can
move it down.
we can move it down.
Okay, will do.
I just want to say it would be a lot easier if this was just an ordered conversation face-to-face.
Yes,
But that's not the world we live in, is it?
You think?
Yeah, I totally.
Should I go ahead here?
Go for it.
Okay. This chapter is pretty short, and it doesn't have sections. There are 11 paragraphs that are numbered across the top, and I labeled the first half of the chapter as the way life is, and the second half as the challenge to the spirit movement. She starts out by talking about life, saying life is a good partner, offering us capacities we need, and life gives us a world rich in potential, and life gives us order for free, capable of organizing itself with inner coherence. And life gives us unending, incessant creativity, eager to create newness. And in the second paragraph, she titles it, Think of Tropical Fish. And I think she's talking about the variety, but it made me think of the image of when I was snorkeling either in the Marshall Islands or in Jamaica. You'd look out over the water, and all you saw was water, just as far as you could see. And yet, when you stuck your head in the water with a snorkel on, you saw this myriad of color, variety of shapes and sizes, and of fish or animals. And it kind of reminded me of looking at the variety there is in life, other people and places and cultures, and she says at the end of that section, the first part, that the first 3 paragraphs, she said, we've rebuffed the planet instead of partnering with it. We've taken over assuming we know best. Then she goes on to talk about the power of possibilities. And she uses the quote from RFK Kennedy, some look at things the way they are and ask why. I dream of things that never were and ask why not. How many people can we think of that think that way or thought that way, and yet she says further, the forces of destruction have taken over from the forces of creation. So she goes back and forth from a positive side to a negative side as it has to do with the way life is. We keep wanting reasons and causes and conditions that have led us so far from home, she says. And yet she says everything comes from somewhere. There are good scientific reasons for how we got to be. And that reminded me of Brian Swim's, I don't know if you've seen the film that Brian Swim prepared called The Universe Story, but it's a story, a visual story of the Big Bang and the 13.8 billion years that transpired after the Big Bang. But in that movie, he says every single thing that we have on this earth, every molecule, every atom was here at that instant. And nothing more has come since then. And it really makes you think about how that could happen, how we came to be. She says, life's dynamics interacted with human will to create this life-destroying mess. In other words, when you talk about the environment, we have really messed it up. And she says, without discernment, we act from blind hope, not from clear seeing. She talks a lot about clear seeing, or the way I put it is increased consciousness, really increased consciousness of what's happening. She says, we push on believing with greater effort, more passion, and better networking, we will force the world to change for the better. It reminded me of when I was in Chicago in the late 80s. I was at the Institute, living at the Institute, and I was assigned to work in research to prepare 2 speeches, the title of which was Forcing the Kingdom. We talked a lot about the kingdom of God here on earth, and to be audacious enough to even think about or writing a speech that we could force the kingdom was very puzzling to me, or just very audacious for us to think that we could do that. But she says that we have a passion to force the world to change. And yet we keep, in another paragraph she says, we need to stop the waste of wonderful humans. And how many times have we seen in the last few weeks where wonderful humans have been just slaughtered? She says tries to say why these destructive cycles can't be stopped, and says that we've got to use science. We must use science to explain why these destructive cycles arose and why they can't be stopped. And again, she says, as she said in chapter 1 and 2 other chapters, my purpose is not to add to our despair. The intention is to increase our clarity, again I say consciousness, so that we might discern wise action. She says at the end, we can't change the way the world is, but by opening to the world as it is, we can discover how to be warriors for the human spirit. Anyway, shifting gears, the purpose of this chapter is to increase our clarity of home so we can discern wise action as warriors for the human spirit. And the question I have is, given the dread and fear that Leah talked about in chapter 3 that we experience, can we make the leap in consciousness that is required to be warriors for the human spirit? And maybe we might change that to be, how can we make a leap in consciousness that is required? So I would ask for reflection.
David, this is Randy. I think it's probably your paragraph 10. I didn't number them as you did, but it's the next to the last paragraph. But I think I shared with this group before that I've been kind of following Margaret Wheatley for a number of years, and really first read her when she wrote Leadership in the New Science. And I think in the second 2/3 of that paragraph, she really tells her story, and it put in place for me a lot of what I have observed with her. And that is, I think I even said maybe last week that when I first was reading her, she was a scientist who sometimes used poetry, but now she's become, in my estimation, a poet who sometimes refers back to science. And I think what you pointed out to us about how she uses that is exactly right. But she has spent a lot of her time saying that if you model organizations after the way nature is and things work in nature, that you'll make them better and more effective organizations. And she's demonstrated that. She's demonstrated that in all sorts of business organizations, even to the U.S. Army. And now she's come to the insight that none of that worked, and so now she's got a whole new way she's using science to help define where she's ended up now. And I thought it was very interesting that she did not use the phrase that she used to use, which was effective action. She now talks about wise action. So I'm complete.
77. Four, 9. Yep, I know.
This is Jim. Just when David said life's dynamics connected with human will to create this mess we're in, my computer crashed. And I just come back. What's the question?
Bottom of your screen there, Jim.
Given the dread and fear that we experience, can we make the leap in consciousness that is required to be warriors for the human spirit?
You know, oh, sorry. Well, it came to me that we teach the word, the X, you know, the past is approved, future is open, all of life is good, my life is received. We teach these underlying theories, we call them the 5 master images. And people really struggle with that because saying yes to your past, to the past, and saying yes to the world as it is, when it is not what you would like it to be is one hell of a struggle. And it seems to me that's kind of what she's saying here, though, that my intention is to increase our clarity and opening to the world as it is, we can discover how to be warriors. So it seems to me that what she's asking, what I hear her asking me anyway, is to observe and say yes and to choose to, with eyes wide open, I'm sitting here with my eyes closed while I'm saying this, but anyway, with eyes wide open, acknowledge the world as it is, and then ask what's required. And that would be part, I mean, that sounds so simple, but it's so difficult. This whole year I've been struggling with that for damn sure. And that might be what it's required to be warriors. And how do you do that? I don't know. It's pretty tricky. Anyway, that's a thought I had.
This is Steve there in the purpose sentence where you've said that discerning wise action as warriors for the human spirit. It strikes me more of an issue of engagement rather than awareness or consciousness. It isn't like you want to stop being aware, but it's more, you know, I think of the way Pema Chodron would say it would be more like, you know, where do you choose to contribute what you have? When you show up at the party, what are you bringing to the party? And so that discerning wise action is, for me, is the question that she's really engaging.
As I was reading the last half, you know, she starts at the last half out by saying, there's a need to be reacquainted with our planet. And it struck me that in that last half, she was really talking about knowing, doing, and being. So you talked about engagement. That's certainly the doing part. But the being part is being open to the way the world is, but also realizing, as Joe talked about chapter 1, that no matter how many people you come in contact with, say you come in contact with 1,000 people, you never know what effect your being had on those people, on the spirit of those people. We just don't know.
Yeah, this is Gordon. I was going to pick up a little bit on what you were saying, Joe. It seems to me that that Margaret is very much adopting what we used to call the stance of humility, daring to stand present to the reality of what is given. And for her, it's a dreadful, terrible, tragic mess. I mean, in the sense that I think she's reflecting not only her own struggle, but probably that of many of her colleagues who really have almost burned out in working toward what they saw as necessary change, systemic change in the world, and are asking themselves, as is she, what did we do wrong here, or where do we go now when everything seems to be in ashes beneath our feet. And part of it is that I want to come back and say it's never a binary situation like that, that everything is in such a disastrous situation. There are wonderful things happening in our world today, and not to recognize that is sad. But the other part of it is she's putting herself in the position of saying we have to look reality authentically straight in the face and admit that what we have worked for has not happened. Good. What I don't get from Margaret is the sense that we view the world as it is with love. And that's a faith stance that I'm not yet picking up. I hope I do as we go further into what she has to say. And I've not completed the book. I'm only into the second of the 3 sections of the book. But it's one thing to say it's a dreadful world out there, and we have to just face up to that, and then look for what the right action is that we can perform. It's another, I think, to say, and I think Jim used to have a little closing that I found rather nice in his email, which went something like, everything is perfect just as it is, and there's a lot of room for improvement, which I think is a way of holding the tension that needs to be held here, in that all is good, all is received, all is accepted, all is open, kind of thing. And I'll end with that.
We're sort of drawing to the end of our time. How do we wrap this up, David? This is great. Or unravel it further, whatever works.
Well, this chapter is sort of an introduction to the home section. She just almost in the last sentence, she does the introduction to the section, and that is, we cannot change the way the world is, but by opening to the world as it is, we can discover how to be warriors for the human spirit. Now, she leaves you at this point with the question of, well, what is to come? What does she mean by that? And so it's hard to draw an awful lot of conclusion. I liked Randy's comment about using science, but I also think that I agree with Gordon that you have to use love too.
So, Helen, what do you do on GoToMeeting to clap? I think that I had a great time. Did the rest of you have a good time? I mean, I appreciate being dragged into this. I read it and I go, she's wrong, and I stop. So Joe says if we just like clap and all right.
Or we could all put our webcams on and, go sort of in concert here.
And then turn them off so the rest of the people can.
And appreciate our 2 leaders for this.
Sure.
It's great.
So what's next week?
I really appreciate being dragged into this book more deeply. There's something that's calling me. There's some sense of me that wants to kind of fall in love with what Margaret is doing, but I'm kind of reluctant to really get into it. So let's just, if we could, everybody that's still online, let's just go on, and each person, kind of in a sentence, what's one thing you're taking away from our time together?
Okay, so it starts with Helen.
Sure, why not?
So I'm taking away from tonight saying yes to the world as it is, remembering that there is a bigger picture to this that I may never understand, but just saying yes and accepting what is and doing the best in my little corner with what I think is my best work to do. And I'm complete.
And I think it goes to Ellen Howie next, actually.
I'm going to take away the value of exploring what is the provocative question that I need to pay attention to. I'm complete.
David Rebstock, you're next.
No matter what Margaret Wheatley says, I still think the path it received, life is good and the future is open. I'm complete.
Gordon, and I find myself in the tension between cause, abandon, hope, the final temptation, and the understanding of the hope beyond hope, which is part of my particular religious tradition, and whatever the hell that means.
This is James. I guess I'm taking away that if life dynamics and human will have created this mess, then your computer is liable to crash.
And I'm
complete.
And I'm Joe, and I'm taking away gratitude for colleagues who are willing to face provocative questions and share both the limits they've run into and the yeses that they've said to life.
This is Leah. I've been sort of preoccupied with the messiness of our world, and I think this business of everything comes from somewhere is like saying this is all in your lap, and I don't know this, but I think part of the Warriors, I'm anticipating that part of the Warriors' challenge is to see that as a gift. And it seems like it's particularly troubling right now because the world doesn't seem to want to operate out of the line somebody drew after World War II. Those lines just don't make sense. I would say I'm complete, but I don't feel very complete.
Randy.
Yeah, I guess what I'm coming away with is just, a bunch of questions. I mean, in the 4th chapter, she said everything comes from somewhere, and I guess I'm kind of wanting to find out now, where does it come from, and how did it get here, and what do we do with it? But I'm really struck about how we were all kind of caught up with the fact that she called this a mess, and I'm really reminded of the old saying that it ain't nothing till you call it. And so I'm kind of going to ponder this next week. If I don't want to call it a mess, what do I want to call it? And I'm complete.
Roger.
Oh, yeah. This is Roger. I'm in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, and of course, just looking at our two senators from Oklahoma, Jim Inhofe, and we got a new one too, but we show you how messy life is and how dysfunctional it is. But I liked what Gordon said about the need to add love, and perhaps that's what Wheatley is talking about when she talks about becoming a warrior of the human spirit. But I don't know. This has been good. I'm glad I'm here. I'm complete.
Cheryl.
This is Cheryl with my scratchy voice. You know, I'm constantly reminded, this is my second time through this book, and I'm constantly reminded of how much consciousness it takes to really be a warrior for the human spirit, and how that's kind of a different perspective if you use it as you walk through your daily life, and really think about things that you're encountering on a day-to-day basis rather than being so big picture. And I actually can't expand on that because of my voice, so I'll just leave it there.
Thank you. Steve.
Well, this is Steve. I think my takeaway is and understand this, trying to be with this, where do you stand in the matters at hand question that she raises. Not only where do you stand, but what's the next thing you do after you stand? Where do you move towards? What do you move towards? What do you engage? And I think that's a good question.
Thank you all. Randy, should you and I go next week?
I'm ready to go for next week on Chapter 5.
All right, and I'll do Chapter 6, and then we're diving in. It'd be great if, as you have opportunity on, Jesus, we've got so many options, on Dropbox, on Google Docs, or on the website, share a thought or a comment would help our colleagues who haven't been on these calls to get connected in and see what's going on and dive in. I think it's getting clearer and clearer to me that those of us in this broader profession, it's time for us to step back from the technical, from the business, from the short term, take a deep breath, look what's really going on, raise the question, do we really see ourselves as warriors in the day-to-day, and then take that back. And I don't think it's easy in the top network. I don't think it's easy in the ICA network. I don't think it's easy in IAF. So I feel like we're on behalf of helping folks who are really unaccountably busy trying to get things done in a good way to share our reflections. Anything else before we close?
Yeah, just since we have people on this call who might have an answer to this question, I understood that the ICA USA was preparing to have an announcement about future leadership at about this time, and I was wondering if it had been delayed or had been made yet.
This is Randy. That announcement will be made this coming Friday.
Thank you.
Thanks, and thanks especially to people who come on for the first time, and in particular to Cheryl, who announced at the beginning she was not feeling well and not prepared and joined in and participated anyway. Thank you all. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Bye now.
Good night.
See ya. Good night.
Good night.